I would be covering my eyes if this was a movie or like a TV show or something. And I'm recording now, so someone can like sleep or dream walk. I was gonna say sleepwalk. Well, hello. Welcome back to my channel. Just Shauna here to talk about some friggin' books, specifically the Diviners series by Libba Bray. The Diviners is a quartet, and the copies that I have annoy the ever-loving shit out of me because books 3 and 4 are shorter than books 1 and 2. Drives me nuts. This is a young adult, historical, paranormal, fantasy, horror, mystery series. There's a few sub-genres baked in here. I had my notes for this video on my Remarkable notebook, and I didn't realize it's dead. And I'm recording now, so we're just gonna try to go off of memory. I read the first 3 books in this series last year, I'm pretty sure. I just very recently finished the series with the 4th book. And my reading experience with this was pleasantly surprised initially. I had heard so many times how actually creepy and kind of scary this series is. And I'm not a horror girly. As a reader, I just don't gravitate towards horror. I've read some horror and sometimes it is creepy, but in book form, I can definitely handle scary way better than like movie form. I don't love horror movies, unless it's like slasher, thriller type stuff. But paranormal horror, like these books in a movie, I would probably not be able to watch. Or I wouldn't want to watch anyway. But in book form, they were fine. I have heard that the audiobooks, I think it's graphic audio, and that they're very, very, very creepy and kind of scary, genuinely. So I would say if you're like me, where you can read scary horror type stuff, but in book form it's better versus like audio or visual, maybe skip the audiobooks, even though I've heard they're very, very good. So take that into consideration. Yeah, the first book and the second book, I think I gave 4.5 stars. And then I will say that my experience went a little bit downhill with the 3rd book and then with the 4th book. And I think the reason for that, though, is because I am a much more plot-driven reader than character-driven reader. I did really like the characters. It's a cast of characters. It's all these kids, well, not kids, they're young people. I think they're in their late teens, early 20s, mid 20s. So they're young adults, and they're in 1920s Prohibition era, you know, Ziegfeld Follies, flapper girl era, New York. Love that kind of setting. That is, I love a good Prohibition flapper era historical fiction. And this definitely had that. The vibes in that regard were top tier. Loved it. And I did really like all the characters. And all these characters are diviners, which means they have supernatural abilities. Each of them has like one particular, someone's like a fire starter, someone can like sleep or dream walk. I was gonna say sleepwalk. They can dream walk, like walk into other people's dreams. Some can see into the future, just various things they all have. And what we have here is government conspiracy. We definitely have this ominous evil entity trying to kind of take power in our world from another dimension type of shit. That's the overarching plot. Each individual book has its own mystery that we're solving and thing that we're figuring out. But as it's going, there's this overarching plot through the 4 books, of course. And I did really enjoy the characters. And I think if you are a character-driven reader, your reading experience will probably be more even than mine was. Because for me, specifically in the 4th book, the plot, the individual plot of that book, I just kind of dragged in the middle. It was very much like a road trip quest type of thing for the bulk of that 4th book. Each of our characters are kind of paired off in smaller groups, trying to get to this one place across the country and traveling in different ways, traveling in different parts of the country. And we're just like following each of them kind of slowly on that journey. And for me as a reader, that just wasn't as enjoyable of a plot. So that's why my enjoyment went down. I still really liked the characters, but I'm not as character driven of a reader. I will say I really like a good authorial voice, and I did enjoy the authorial voice throughout this. And like I said, atmospheric for sure. Even just reading it, not listening to audio, there were scenes in the first and second book in particular that were genuinely like terrifying, where I was like, I would be covering my eyes if this was a movie or like a TV show or something. I can handle it okay, like just reading the words, but like, ooh, I would not be able to look if this was in front of my face. The themes being touched on here are very interesting too, and like the framework of using these like people with supernatural abilities to look at xenophobia, racism. There's eugenics at play here. This was a time where eugenics was like a kind of popular thing, and the patriotic, like, real Americans, we want to have those types, and testing people to see if they were diviners or not, but under the guise of just like checking their blood for pure DNA and such. And then there's like government conspiracy of like testing on people, which obviously not in the context of people with supernatural abilities, but in our very real history, there have been many times where there has been testing done on people of different races, people with disabilities, mental health issues, marginalized people being taken advantage of and experimented on, essentially. And we have that happening here as well. And again, within the framework of like, the othering is like the diviners, they're other. But there's also xenophobia and racism worked in here, and ableism as well. We have in our cast of characters a very diverse group of characters that we're following. Gender identities, sexual identities, disability representation, racism that they're dealing with. There's people of different races within the group. And yeah, it was very interesting, all of that. I really enjoyed how all of that was executed. Just for me, like I said, as it went on, and especially with the fourth book, the plot elements weren't exactly to my taste enough, and so it brought my enjoyment down. I think I gave the fourth book 3 stars or 3.5 stars, something like that. So quite a jump down from the 4.5 of the first and second book. But like I said, I think if you're not quite as plot driven as I am as a reader, or if you like that kind of plot, if you like kind of a side quest, road trip, adventure thing, then that would be right up your alley, right? Overall, I'm very glad that I read this series. I'm mad that I waited so long to read it. It was one that I kept being like, maybe someday, but I don't know. Yeah, no, I'll read it. Oh, it sounds like it's actually kind of scary. That's not exactly my jam. But overall, there was a lot about it that was to my taste. It just didn't end up being one of my favorite series of all time, which is fine. They don't all have to be total knockouts. So that is all I will say for now. Just kind of wanted to give a little overview chat about the series and urge you to try it if you haven't yet. Unless, I would say, the only people I think who, just don't even bother, if you hate historical fiction, if you're not a fantasy reader at all, or maybe you like high fantasy and you don't really like paranormal urban fantasy set in our world, of course. And I would say if you aren't a big young adult reader, don't really worry about that too much, because we get into some dark themes here, and they're not teenagers. A few of them I think are late teens, like I said, but they weren't acting, other than like the kind of romantic stuff here and there, but even that didn't feel juvenile. So I would say if you are someone like me who typically doesn't pick up young adult, or a lot of times when you do, you just don't vibe with it, don't worry about that with this series. And even if you are like me and you don't love horror, I would say unless you're someone who can't even read anything creepy or scary and it's gonna like keep you up at night, maybe avoid this. But otherwise, really, only if you hate paranormal fantasy or you hate historical fiction, I would say don't even bother trying to pick it up. Otherwise, I think it's a solid series to try out. As always, thank you so much for your time. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.